Batman and Superman are finally on screen together, and they're so unlikable that Wonder Woman is the best part. Also, did you know Batman and Superman's moms have the same first name? Because David S. Goyer and Zack Snyder sure did, and they couldn't wait to tell us. Tonight we review Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice.
That's him right there. There he is. Get a shot.
Who's that?
You must be new. That is Bruce Wayne.
Mr. Wayne. Clark Kent, Daily Planet.
What's your position on the Bat Vigilante in Gotham? Civil liberties are being trampled on in your city. People living in fear. He thinks he's above the law.
The Daily Planet criticizing those who think they're above the law is a little hypocritical. What'd you say? Considering every time your hero saves a cat out of a tree, you read a puff piece editorial about an alien who could burn the whole place down.
Most of the world doesn't share your opinion, Mr. Wayne.
Maybe it's Gotham City and me. We just have a bad history with freaks dressed like clowns.
Boys, Bruce Wayne meets Clark Kent. I love it. I love bringing people together. How are we?
Lex?
Hi, hello, Lex. It is a pleasure. Ow, wow, that is a good grip. You should not pick a fight with this person.
This is the Superhero Pantheon. On this podcast, we take one superhero film a week and decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, the pile of shame, or somewhere in between. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at the real world are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you can do so in 2 ways. First, send an email to superheropantheon@gmail.com. Second, find us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. Brian, perhaps the most contentious episode of this podcast that we have ever had was our review of the 2013 movie Man of Steel, a movie that you really liked and is a movie that I do not like. This also is directed by Zack Snyder and features Superman, but we also get the bonus of Batman branding people, Brian. That's fun, right?
He's in his 50s, he's older than his dad ever was, and he's angry, and I finally realized why he's so angry, because I think he's just so broken over the fact that the Joker killed Jason Todd, which I wish they really emphasized that, because I finally figured out why he's so pissed off after him staring at that fucking costume, which now I know why he's so angry.
Indeed, this is a movie that does have Batman having that Robin costume that says "the joke's on you," which is of course a reference to Jason Todd, who served as the second Robin, Batman's sidekick, and who was tortured and beaten to death by the Joker. In some storylines, Jason Todd returns as the Masked Vigilante, the Red Hood, an animated movie that we will be reviewing at some point in the future. In others, he never actually died, but instead suffered endlessly at the hands of the Joker in an attempt to turn him into an heir to the clown Prince of Crime. So that is the first note that I have. But Brian, I want to tell you that I was really thinking of not seeing this in theaters. Like, I was really ready to hold firm, and I was in Vegas, and my poker skills were not going very well the week that I was there, so I needed a break. I needed to get off the strip, so I went to a movie theater to see Batman vs. Superman, and there are very few films that I've had such a visceral negative reaction to. This is one of them. There were so many moments in this movie when I either grunted or sighed or was getting angry at what I was seeing. There were just so many of those moments, from seeing the Waynes getting murdered again on the street, to Batman's behavior, to Superman's behavior, to everything going on. And then the moment when it is the Martha reveal is legitimately one of the dumbest things that I have ever seen done in a superhero movie. And that is the legacy of this movie ultimately. That regardless of anything else that's done here, and I certainly think it's not all negative, but when people think of this movie, that is what they will identify. This is the movie where Batman and Superman stop fighting because their moms have the same name.
It's more than that. I kind of see what's going on now. It's the fact that he sees Superman as this alien that's there to cause all this chaos and destruction. And no matter how much Alfred tries to convince him, he's convinced himself that he has to kill Superman in order to save the planet because he's got some probably toxic masculinity issues as well going into that. So that kind of ties into it. That's the way I see it. And then the idea that once he keeps saying Martha, and it gets really confused in that moment because he keeps thinking like, why do you keep saying my mom's name? Well, how do you know my mom? Blah, blah, blah. And then he realizes, oh, wait, that's his mom's name as well. And at that moment in time, he realizes, man, this guy's just as human as I am. I can't just kill this guy. What am I doing? Like, I'm doing the wrong thing. And then in that moment, he realizes that he's completely in the wrong. And that's why he switches his mindset. That's the way I see it. Like, I know it sounds stupid, but in that moment, like, I see it in his eyes. Like, he realizes, what the fuck am I doing? Why do I want to kill this guy? He's just as human as I am.
There is nothing in this movie to suggest, in my view, that Zack Snyder gives a damn about any of the characters that are in this movie.
I don't know about that, man. That's really harsh. Because, like, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of, like, expendable, like, people. Well, I wouldn't say that. It seems like Lex Luthor is killing people just to get his message across, which that's pretty fucked up. I think this idea, like, I know you hate the fact that they killed Jimmy Olsen and they make him this, like, I don't know, reporter spy person, but
I think it's one of the dumbest aspects of the movie, and I think that represents the fact that Zack Snyder does not have any respect for the characters that are in this movie, because the way that Zack Snyder treats this is like it's an Easter egg. Somebody getting murdered on screen should not be treated as an Easter egg.
because I don't think he's supposed to be in that universe anyway. I think that Jenny character is supposed to be the replacement version of that character. So I think he was just kind of killing off this character and then added, that he was Jimmy Olsen later on, and that was made an Easter egg out of it. I don't even think that was supposed to be a thing. I don't even know. I can't even remember if he says the name Jimmy out loud, but yeah, it just feels like you just kind of change things up, and I'm not as bothered by it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not even big of a fan of the Jimmy Olsen character as a whole. You know what I mean? So it wasn't even that big of a deal for me.
Look, it doesn't matter to me whether they include Jimmy Olsen or not, but the fact of the matter is that they just had him come on screen to be killed, and that to me is Zack Snyder's feelings on these characters in a nutshell. I think the fundamental reason why this movie does not work is that Superman and Batman are both terrible, terrible people. That's the way that Superman is portrayed, because one of the things that they try to do is they try to retcon Man of Steel a little bit, because there was so much destruction porn in both the Avengers and Man of Steel that both of those universes felt like they had to retcon it. The MCU did it with Civil War, and with the Sokovia battle at the end of Ultron, where they are actively trying to save civilians. And in this case, they're doing it by showing Bruce Wayne actually being there, not as Batman, but as Bruce Wayne, which I think is an interesting choice and a pretty gutsy choice, and one that I can see what they were trying to go for, and I think in a better movie, I think it works out. But I think the fundamental problem is that they made a lot of mistakes with Man of Steel, and they got ripped for those mistakes, and they paid for those mistakes to an extent from an artistic and quality standpoint in this movie. Now, granted, this film still did fairly well. It didn't crack $1 billion, but it still did fairly well. But when you look at then what happened with Justice League and how little movie that made, it is very clear to me that people rejected the vision of Zack Snyder after this, because Man of Steel, Superman has been kind of a mixed bag over the last 40 years as far as the quality of the films and the way that people perceive Superman. But Batman is a hugely popular character, especially coming off the momentum of the Christopher Nolan movies. Batman is clearly a character that people want to see on the screen, and they clearly wanted to see him on the screen here. But instead of doing anything interesting, and I don't think Ben Affleck is the problem here. And I think there are hints at him kind of being a detective and trying to solve this mystery. But then they basically neutralize all of that by having him brand people for no reason, and then these people are getting murdered, and Batman is brandishing guns throughout this movie, and they're just literally taking away the essence of who Batman has been for the last 10 to 20 years.
See, I don't think he's like killing people. That's the other thing too. Is like I think he's just doing self-defense, and they happen to just die. The explosion thing, like I think, well, that guy was gonna blow up anyway, so uh, there was no other way to go about it. Um, it just feels like they were just kind of going for like I know it's just maybe too dark, but the idea that this guy's been around for he mentions he's been around for 20 years. It just feels like this guy's seen so much shit and he's just fed up with it. You know what I mean? I like that interpretation of it where it's just almost like I don't know. It's almost like Gene Hackman in Unforgiven kind of thing. I don't know why that's kind of the comparison I come up with, but it just feels like he's just been there and done some shit, and he's just willing to just do dirty things to get the job done. You know what I mean? And yeah, he's branding people, and I think he's just pissed off and angry. You know what I mean? Like he's just frustrated. And I know people don't want to hear that, but goddamn, like this is an old Batman. It's not a young Batman. If this was a young Batman, then I would have issues about it because you know like going through like a couple of years being a Batman, you know, you can kind of see why, you know, you'll still have your morals and stuff like that. But 20 years, I can see why your morals can go out the window and just kind of give up, especially if like the whole Jason Todd thing is canon. And not only that, I think the Phantasm is canon in this movie. Like I think it's canon as well because like Alfred mentions the Phantasm. You know, so after all that to go through, if this is real, like the Phantasm, Jason Todd's death, you know, if the transformation of Two Face over the years, because he subtly mentions that. So I think it just all that built all together, you get this really old Batman that just stops giving a fuck and just plays by his own rules. And I understand that. Like in his mindset, I get that because it's almost like Kevin Costner at the end of The Untouchables. He finally just pushes the guy off the roof because like, fuck it, why not?
And I can understand that. I don't necessarily disagree with the idea of doing an older Batman. In fact, one of the critiques that I have of this upcoming series is that once again, we are going back to either year one or year two, or we're going back to the early stages of Batman. And I think that is treaded territory at this point from both Tim Burton and Christopher Nolan. I would like to see this version of Batman. The issue that I will return to, though, is with Batman and Superman, there is no contrast. Superman in this universe, and I'm not talking about who we think of as Superman in general or as Batman in general, Superman is a murderer. And the way that he is portrayed is he's kind of this scary alien who just destroys things. As the line is said by Bruce Wayne that every time he goes to get a cat, there's a puff piece written about him in the Daily Planet. And there is just a lot of mismatching of the universe here and the way that Superman is being portrayed. The movie has very clearly complicated who Superman is, whether he's a hero, whether he's meant to be a villain. But the problem is that there is almost no moment in this movie when Superman is totally likable. I think they actually do a much better job in Justice League of retconning Superman into being better than here, because we see what he does at the beginning of Man of Steel. We see what happens when he literally smashes that guy through a wall when he goes to save Lois. And there are just so many moments in this movie when Superman is just being a dick to Batman. And because we don't really have any other context, Superman just comes across as a dick. And the same thing for Batman. We have not seen this particular version of Batman. If Christian Bale had returned to this role and it was done even if it was different continuity, I almost think that would have worked out better, because at least we have some context for Christian Bale as Batman. I don't necessarily think that Ben Affleck is bad in this movie, but when you put everything into context, by the time Superman and Batman are fighting each other at the end, I don't care, because these characters have become so unlikable. And the thing is, with Captain America and Iron Man in Civil War, those characters very clearly were established as likable people beforehand through multiple movies, 10 movies at that point, where we see Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. develop these characters. And when there's some moral complexity, it works out so much better because even though they're both kind of right and both kind of wrong, it works so much better because there's been build-up. Here, the DCEU does not do any build-up. There's no Batman in this universe prior to this movie. And the only Superman that we have is, again, the one who destroyed $1 billion worth of property and murdered someone.
Yeah, that's my problem with this. Like, I enjoy the Batman stuff a lot. The problem is, it feels like there's two movies within this movie, a Batman movie and a Superman movie, and the Superman movie is not good at all because there's all this focus on Batman, and it's clear that Snyder loves Batman more, and he wants to do a Batman movie, and that's really what he wanted to do at the beginning. And, like, Superman was just kind of the side thing. And like it's clear that like Superman does not get the love that he deserves in this movie, and that's the one thing that I will criticize. You know, one of the few things I'll criticize about this movie, but like, it's just the structure of the movie and the way they put it together. That's kind of the weakness because everything is rushed and forced, and all these different things going on. It just felt like it would have been better if they would have done like a mini series prior to this to build it up and just do like a mini Batman couple episode series on like HBO or something like that, and then do this movie. I think that would have been a lot better because then you could familiarize yourself with this Batman and whatnot. Because that's the problem. It's like you have to get to know this Batman at the same time, and then all of a sudden they're throwing in Wonder Woman. So a lot of that has a lot of issues, and that's why like the way we care about these characters is much different. And just based off the one Man of Steel, I can see why a lot of people would already have problems related to the Superman character because a lot of people didn't like that Superman, and I get that as well. But I was kind of on the fence because I did like that Man of Steel interpretation, and I was really looking forward to this movie. So I was just kind of open to it, and I'm still kind of open to like a lot of the ideas of this movie. But yeah, I see why there's a lot of anger and where the way they build up the characters and making them unlikable. But I don't know if that was purposeful or not because it seemed like they wanted to challenge the audience and to see who would side would they pick based on like who because it's basically two dudes who just don't understand each other and that they start fighting each other, and that seems like such a macho alpha male complex thing to do anyway, and that just seems like like some subtle not or hints at like like I mentioned before, toxic male, alpha male egos clashing, right? And it becomes that kind of situation.
And I think it says a lot that they, because of what you are just saying, that they had to shoehorn Wonder Woman into this movie.
Yeah, I know. It's just so much that they wanted to do because they wanted to catch up with the MCU, and that's the problem as well. And they needed to take their time, and they didn't. And that's the other major issue as well. And doing this back to back with Justice League did not help as well as you know at all. So I think all those things together, it just feels like they try to do too much, and I feel like you know it sucks, man, because there's some good stuff to this that I really like, and I really like the Batman stuff a lot in this movie. So it's hard because I feel like there's a good hour and 20-minute Batman movie within this movie.
All right, we will return to this in just a second here. I did want to point out, though, some of the notes and some of the things that I've learned about this movie. This is an idea that goes all the way back to August 2001, when Wolfgang Peterson was rumored to be directing an Akiva Goldsman script. Goldsman, of course, is responsible for Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. His idea was that Bruce Wayne's fiancée is slain by the Joker, which sends him on a revenge rampage and brings him into conflict with Superman, who tries to stop him. In this case, I don't know how I feel about the fiancé part, but I think this at least is getting to both of these characters a little bit better in a way. The film was shelved, but in Goldsman's I Am Legend teaser poster for the film, there was a Superman shield seen inside a bat in the opening scene, which kind of teased this movie 9 years before it happened. It was rumored at the time, I can't believe I'm about to read this, George Clooney will reprise the Batman role, and John Travolta would play Superman.
Yeah, that's just leftover '90s bullshit that I don't want to see, and I'm glad they didn't do. And that plot idea where the Joker kills his fiance, that just I don't know. That just seems like you're just ripping off the Killing Joke, but whatever.
Before Ben Affleck was cast as Bruce Wayne, he was reportedly approached by Warner Brothers to direct a Justice League film adaptation in which he would have also portrayed Batman. He was also approached to direct Man of Steel. Ben Affleck was a very hot director at this point, and they definitely wanted him to be involved with the DCEU, both as a director as well as a writer, and because remember, he did win an Academy Award for writing, of course. So that is worth pointing out. There is one aspect of this movie that I think is significantly better than the Nolan part, and that is the way that they do Batman's voice modulating. In this case, he electronically alters his voice. After the casting of Ben Affleck in this role, this was an idea that was suggested by his friend, director Kevin Smith. Once again, Kevin Smith making a superhero movie better, Brian.
Yeah, and I don't know if he can do it on a theatrical scale, but he does it well on a TV scale. So even though Kevin Smith can't really, I don't know, I don't think he can have the power to helm a whole superhero movie theatrical, but for these little ideas, I think he can come in as a consultant or producer or whatever and come up with these small ideas that kind of work.
I think Kevin Smith should be a consultant for DC or Marvel. I think it would be a really good idea. I am not a fan of Kevin Smith as a director at this point, but I think as a consultant, I think he would function really, really well because I think the DCEU has certainly recovered, but I certainly think that they could still use a few more good ideas. This is a movie that had some very negative and mixed reviews. Ben Affleck said, in a losing argument, if you want to lose an argument and you are fighting on the wrong side, you will make this following comment. We made this movie for the fans, not the critics. His co-star, Henry Cavill, said similar things in other interviews. Brian, let me tell you, film critics do not get paid very well, and these are movies that take up hours of their lives. If they go in wanting to hate this movie, they are bad critics. Almost no credible critic is going into Batman versus Superman and wanting to hate it, especially when the movie is 2.5 hours. What Affleck and Cavill have asserted, just like in all other cases when somebody says a line like this, it is absurd.
Yeah, they were just kind of trying to cover their asses because I remember that meme and gif going around of Affleck's face and how sad Fleck. I feel so bad, man, because I feel like deep down he thought this was going to be good, and I don't know. Because I even heard this rumor, even from Kevin Smith himself, that like months before this movie came out, they did a private Warner Brothers executive screening, and they got like a standing ovation from the executives, right? So I kept thinking, like, what the hell happened in between that point and then the theatrical cut and the release? I don't know if the version they saw was completely different, but it seemed like Affleck thought this was going to be a completely different movie than what came out.
Right, and of course this would affect the future of the DCU dramatically. A couple of casting notes. After seeing his performance in Cloud Atlas, the studio wanted Tom Hanks to portray Lex Luthor. I don't know if that would have been good or bad, but it would have been much more interesting than Jesse Eisenberg.
Yeah, we definitely need middle-aged Lex Luthor. That's the only way this role works. I'm still in shock as to why they went the way they did and went young and crazy and eccentric billionaire type. I don't know if they just loved the Facebook movie so much that they wanted to bring that in, but goddamn, I'm not even that big of a fan of Jesse Eisenberg. So I only like him in Zombieland, and that's the only movie I can think of.
Right, he was in The Social Network. I think it's funny that last week we reviewed Michael Cera as Robin, and this week we have Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. Tom Hanks's Lex Luthor would be interesting because he has almost never played a villain. The only movie two movies I can think of where he plays kind of the antagonist role, that is The Lady Killers, which is a Coen Brothers movie, and when he is Hanratty in Catch Me If You Can. Other than that, I mean, I guess in A League of Their Own, kind of to an extent, but even then, he's revealed to ultimately be a good guy. So him playing just a flat-out baddie would have been really interesting.
Yeah, especially at his age. I mean, he would have brought some like crazy like layers to the character and stuff like that. I like that casting choice a lot, but at the same time, I do feel like Luthor has to be a little bulky a little bit. Like, I feel like he's got this like thing where he's kind of like conscious of like not being as strong as Superman. That's why in the cartoons he's a little bulkier and muscular. So I kind of want that as well. Like, I wouldn't mind Rainn Wilson just kind of stepping in and kind of like putting on some muscle and doing the performance he did in the animated movie we talked about a couple months ago. But something like that, I feel like there has to be kind of some size to him. I thought Jesse Eisenberg was way too small and scrawny for the role and just didn't fit at all.
Now, this next one, I am concerned that his role in Doom Patrol is going to prevent him from actually doing this, but I would love to see Timothy Dalton be considered for the role of Alfred J. Pennyworth again. He was considered for this movie, especially if they're going with the idea that Pennyworth is a British spy, as the Epics series is proposing. I would love to see Timothy Dalton play this role. I think I've mentioned this before, but Timothy Dalton is my second favorite James Bond, if you can believe it. I think he's really good in the two movies that he's in. I think he steals the show in Hot Fuzz. I think he's a really underrated actor. I think Timothy Dalton is really good in The Rocketeer. I would have loved to have seen him play Alfred in this movie or possibly in the future Batman movie. I know you love the idea of Ray Fiennes. I think that's also a really good choice. But I think Timothy Dalton, his intensity would, I think, just be a little bit different and something, because I'm not sure he would be as traditional of a butler, but I would just love to see how it works out.
I'm thinking more Clayface, like the Clayface that's the actor type, the classical actor that's aged and is no longer the star that he once was. I think that's perfect for him. But that's just kind of my idea, because like ever since I've heard this, like or not phantom casting, but this idea of bringing back a dead person to play a like a comic book character, like Laurence Olivier playing Clayface. Someone meant, I think it was Mark Bernard on the podcast he does. That idea kind of stuck with me. So this idea of like Timothy Dalton as Clayface, that works a lot for me.
All right, let's get to the actual categories. We've talked a lot about Batman and Superman. You have your own viewpoint on Batman and Superman, and mine is very different. I think both of them are the worst. You at least like Batman, not as big of a fan of Superman. We see the ending of Man of Steel from Bruce Wayne's perspective as Bruce Wayne is trying to save his staff, and we get more 9/11 imagery, and it does not age well. That's all I'm going to say to that, with the person jumping out of the building. I think it's notable that they use Bruce Wayne instead of Batman and is being held to account for his behavior. That's what they're trying to do in this movie. Batman is playing detective and trying to figure out how Russians and Lex Luthor figure into what's happening. Lois Lane, she's not a character. I love Amy Adams. I think there is no justice done to her character. I think one of the first times that we see her, she's in distress. The next time we see her, she's naked in a 1960s bathtub. I think there are some good bits of banter between those two, and I do actually like that Lois knows who Batman or who Superman is. I really like that element of it, and not just making her look like an idiot. I think that's a good modern decision. I think there's some good bits of banter between Alfred, who is played by Jeremy Irons, and Batman. But I don't know about you, but Alfred is too young. Like, Jeremy Irons just seemed too young for this role, because he and Affleck just seem like they're within 5 to 10 years of each other, and that really doesn't work.
I don't know. Jeremy Irons can kind of play like a wide range of ages. I think. Like you look at him now, like you put some makeup on him, he can pull off his 50s, even though I think he's in his late 60s, early 70s now. Jeremy Irons has that kind of look to him where, even the last 20 years, you kind of make him look the same. But that's just me, because he's got that kind of like face to him. But I I liked it. Well, it's hard to say because I've seen both versions of this movie, and Amy Adams does have a lot more to do in the director's cut. But in the theatrical cut, which we're reviewing, yeah, she doesn't have as much to do. She's less of the reporter. Like, there's a lot of good deleted scenes that I wish they left in and just left some other stuff out. But there are some, good Lois Lane moments that were cut, and that's disappointing because what was in there, or what was cut, like, actually made more sense to the actual plot in the story, which sucks. But I'm not a big fan of this version of Superman. Like, it just feels like he's just too much of a dork and he's naive of what's going on in like Gotham City, and it just feels like he's just gonna stroll right in and just stop Batman from what he's doing, and that didn't sit right with me at all. But it's I guess what his mindset is that, like, okay, this Batman guy's been out there, he's terrorizing the bad guys, but he's also terrorizing good people in his eyes. But he doesn't realize that he's doing the same thing when he's going out there and trying to save people, and then causing all these, collateral damage. Going out there and trying to save people as well. So it's both sides, and he doesn't realize that he's doing the same thing. But Batman, I mean, goddamn, like I mentioned, this is, I don't know, man. It's one of my top Batmans in ever. I just love this Ben Affleck, angry, grizzled, broken Batman. So it's going to be tough to score because the Batman stuff is great.
Well, we haven't even gotten to the rest of the heroes yet. We still have to talk about Wonder Woman.
Oh God, I forgot about that. There's a lot of characters, and that's another problem with this movie.
Wonder Woman, I think, is very simply the best character in this movie. I think she gets the best treatment because she's not a dick. I think there is a moment even when they tease her actually not being a hero and she teases flying away, but the fact that there is this aura of mystery to her and the fact that she gets her iconic theme song at the end and she joins the battle and is able to be competitive with Doomsday. Gal Gadot is a breath of fresh air in this movie, and I was really wondering if this was just because she was in this movie and I didn't like it and she was so good that it redeemed it for me slightly, but she is such a charismatic performer, and I think she laps both Henry Cavill as Superman and Ben Affleck as Batman. That is my viewpoint on this.
That's crazy because I think she's in this movie for like less than 10 minutes. I mean, and she hardly says anything at all, and she doesn't even raise her voice hardly. But the one moment I do like is her at the end when she smiles when she gets knocked down by Doomsday, and then she just looks at him, she smiles, and she just kind of realizes, okay, I haven't had this kind of fight in a while. So I thought that was like a nice little touch to the character. So yeah, even for the 10 minutes she was in it, like it was fantastic. She kind of rocked it, and the music rocked when she came in. So I enjoyed that, and the whole mystery aspect of it all, and her discovering the photo and the video. I like that part of it, especially the videos. Like that was like a nice little tease and the way they set that up. But also, I know there's this criticism like, how does Lex Luthor know that like all these people have powers, and how does he know about Aquaman, and how does he know about the Flat? Look, he's the richest dude on Earth probably at this point, maybe even richer than Bruce Wayne. So he can probably do whatever he wants and knows all the secret identities and stuff like that. And that's probably why he knows that Batman is Bruce Wayne and blah blah blah.
There's so many issues with this movie that would probably not even make my top 50. Among some of the other issues, we got a mini trailer for the other characters, including The Flash, Aquaman, and Cyborg, which that's great to literally grind this 2.5 hour or 3 hour movie to a halt just before the Batman vs. Superman fight so that we can see trailers for the other characters.
Like I said, too many characters they had to introduce, and all these things they had to set up. I just wish that they took their time, and they should have just did 2 movies in 1 year, a Man of Steel follow up, and then just into the Batman versus Superman. Leave Doomsday in its own Man of Steel, universe or whatever, and then do the Batman stuff separate. But it's too late now, and that's just kind of the way I see how they could have saved it.
And the other protagonist is Perry White, and he's just a dick to Clark Kent the whole time. I understand what they're trying to do with the football plot, but there is in no way do I buy for a second that people are not interested in Batman and Superman, even in this universe, and reading about them. I just don't buy that would not sell them 10 times the newspapers that it would for some football game. Maybe I'm insane, but Perry White's argument here holds no water for me.
See, I thought the whole joke within the joke was that no one reads newspapers anyway, which they kind of mentioned. So I was like, I don't think it even matters whatever's on the newspaper. No one's going to read it anyway. It's all about the internet. But I guess there wasn't as many internet headlines in this movie at all.
Right. My score is probably going to be really low because, again, Batman and Superman are the worst. I am giving this a 3, and a lot of that has to do with Gal Gadot and her performance in this movie in her 10 minutes.
I'm going to go, God, this is where I'm going to get some flack. I'm going to go with a 7 just because, again, the Wonder Woman stuff, Batman, or God, Ben Affleck as Batman is just one of my favorites, and, Henry Cavill is a step down from what he was in Man of Steel. So originally I was going to give this a 6, but I just, I can't help but think of Ben Affleck as my definitive older Bruce Wayne.
I mean, you are certainly entitled to your opinion, and I think that is one interpretation of this movie. And I guess the one good thing is that this is going to be an interesting rest of the podcast because our scores are going to diverge pretty significantly throughout this whole thing. I will be very curious to know what you think of the villains. Jesse Eisenberg is very spastic, and unlike anything we've ever seen out of Lex Luthor, I really did not like him. I think he is the worst performance in this movie, and the fact that Jesse Eisenberg has not been in a lot of big movies since leads me to believe that this hurt his career at least a little bit. He plays 2 alleged awful superheroes off each other. Doomsday looks like the Hulk 2008 villain. He is not a character. I have no idea what they were trying to accomplish with Doomsday and slotting him into this movie. There's so much going on here. This is an amalgamation of like three different comic book series, and the fact that they introduce Lex Luthor, Batman, and Doomsday in this movie is absolutely absurd. And the Senator character, he is pretty much useless in a way. I understand what they're trying to do, and I I guess the most unrealistic part of this movie to me is that there is a Democratic senator from Kentucky.
Damn it, you stole my joke about the Democratic senator from Kentucky. But I guess that just shows you we're on the same wavelength again. Uh, yeah, I don't know what the hell they were doing with this young Lex Luthor, man, and I don't know if they were going because I know there's like a version of like Alexander Luthor, a descendant of Lex Luthor, who's like a good version, but who has the long hair, and I don't know why they gave this version of Lex Luthor the long hair. I don't know what they were going for, and I think they were going for that, like him doing the whole uh, Mark Zuckerberg kind of like eccentric billionaire type, and it just doesn't work. And I know they were trying to modernize it, and him like the idea of like, hey, step into my office, and they just step into like this, cafeteria table. I thought that was like a nice little joke, but that kind of shows you the mindset of his corporate mindset, I guess. But I'm just so used to this old school business type corporate Lex Luthor that we're so used to. And I definitely think Lex Luthor should have been older, for sure. So,
I think even if you go perhaps by looking for someone who's closer to Elon Musk or someone like that, I actually think that works out better. If you're going to cast Lex Luthor younger, I think that could work, but I think you have to go more Elon Musk than Mark.
yeah, I guess they were going for that Zuckerberg thing, and I just because it was just fresh off the Jesse Eisenberg nomination. Was he nominated for an Oscar for that movie?
I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that he was because that movie was very well represented. And if I were to make a list of best movies of the decade, I think Social Network is right up there. I think it's spectacular. I really like Jesse Eisenberg in that specific movie, but I think that performance works for that movie because that's how Mark Zuckerberg is. Again, I think if you go with someone who is behaving more like an Elon Musk, I think that works out so much better because I'm not inherently against the idea of a tech bro version of Lex Luthor because I think at this point you're either going with that version or you're just going with the white nationalist Donald Trump version of Lex Luthor. I think those are the two. Those are your choices basically.
Yeah, and I don't know why they went that direction because I'm not even a big fan of that. I'm not even a big fan of Jesse Eisenberg. I just feel like he does some of the same stuff over and over. So it's just frustrating to watch, and I just want like an older version. And he's not even that tall, man. Lex Luthor should be at least as tall as Superman when he looks him eye to eye, and that's just kind of how I feel.
Right, and I think Doomsday is not a great character. It did not really work in the comic books as far as character development, but I think it works out better on the page because it's a comic book and you have so much more flexibility. In a movie, when you just have this CGI character destroying things, that really doesn't do much. And the problem is that Man of Steel had so much destruction porn that they couldn't do it here. And the effectiveness of Doomsday is neutralized by the fact that he is in an empty bunker destroying things, and he's not really threatening humans. So I think, again, this movie is paying for the sins of Man of Steel because they cannot destroy Metropolis again because of some of the criticisms that they took.
To be honest, it didn't even need that. It could have just ended with him saving Martha Kent at the end, and that would have been an ending for me. I think they just went way too over the top, and they tried to shoe in a horn all this stuff.
Because they wanted to kill Superman and transition into the Justice League.
See, that's the problem. You don't need to kill Superman to do the Justice League. I don't know why they're obsessed with doing that. That's something you do way later on. Like Doomsday is something you do like way later on in like a third or fourth movie. But the impatience they had, that whatever, it's frustrating. I'm going with a 4. You might go lower. I did like certain aspects. I like the Russian guy because he didn't say much, but he got the job done. He was the mercenary. He plays the same role in every movie that he's in. There's like the Russian mercenary. Pretty sure he was the Russian mercenary in John Wick as well in one of them. But shout out to him. I forget his name, but he was decent.
I'm giving this a 2. Jesse Eisenberg is so awful, and I just think the other characters are pretty useless. So I think my score is going to reflect that. Let's talk about the story. If I were to read the Wikipedia of this movie, the plot on Wikipedia, It would blow your mind because there is so much going on here, Brian. I think this is one of the most deeply cynical and busy superhero movies ever made, as the plot is all over the place and they are basically trying to do two or three movies within one. And I do want to address something that I talked about with the Nolan movies and talking about grounded. Those movies are grounded, but they were ultimately very positive about Gotham City. Batman had faith that the citizens would do the right thing. And Batman had faith in himself that he would do the right thing. And for the most part, Batman did the right thing. When the Joker fell, Batman saved him. Batman saved millions of people by driving and flying that nuclear bomb into the middle of the ocean. He wasn't branding people. He was prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice if that's what it took to save people. And in this case, I just don't believe that anybody in this movie is worthy of saving ultimately. I think that there's just so much cynicism in this world, and there is a way to tell that story in The Watchmen, for example, another movie that Zack Snyder directed not very well. And there's a way to do this in other superhero movies. But if you are going to have Batman and Superman both be cynical, then I don't think your movie is going to work, because what you end up with is you end up with a mishmash of The Dark Knight Returns, the death of Superman, and Wonder Woman is also thrown in there as well. This movie is taking a shortcut, trying to build something similar to the MCU. I think the big battle between Batman and Superman has its moments, but I think the actual payoff is just so completely absurd that it neutralizes those previous 15 to 20 minutes. And the fact that Batman basically kicks Superman's ass for the whole thing, it's a squash match, and I think that, again, shows the disrespect, the lack of respect that Zack Snyder has for the Superman character. And there is this idea that people aren't sure how to feel about Superman, and in a moment when they are trying to show how good Superman is, they of course go with this very cliched visual image of, I believe that it is a poor Latin American country, but it is a lot of brown people surrounding this white savior. That is not good visual imagery to have in 2016. Game of Thrones also did some of that same shit, and it was pretty annoying then. It's annoying here. I just don't buy that anyone could possibly see Superman as a hero after what he did to Metropolis in Man of Steel. Lex Luthor, I think, in this movie he functions as a shit disturber, but he really isn't as good as the main antagonist of Civil War. I don't think that he does as good of a job making Superman and Batman plausibly hate each other than the character in Civil War. And for all those reasons, I think the story of this movie is so bad.
There's some good plot, like parts to this story. Like I feel like if you just put all the Batman stuff together, that's a good little Batman movie. You know what I mean? Like if you put the Superman stuff together, it's not a really good Superman movie. I don't know. Like you said, just there's three different movies going on, and it's frustrating because I wanted to watch the Batman movie on its own pretty much while I'm watching this, and I just wanted to focus on that stuff. But then you have to throw in the other stuff and the Wonder Woman stuff, and then Luthor's plot is just too convoluted. You know what I mean? He's trying to, get them angry at each other, and he's planning all this stuff. He's causing the terrorist attack at the Senate hearing or whatever, and setting up the attack at the beginning of the movie, and blah blah blah. It was just too much, and with Lois Lane in the background trying to figure out what's going on as well. All again, just too much going on, and yeah, I just like I said, they should have done like a mini series to set up this movie or something like that, and just do the Batman stuff separately. Even though I know you're not a fan of the opening, man, I love that opening. See, Snyder's not a good like long cinematic movie director. Like he's good at doing like music video type vignettes or like montages, and he's really good at that. Like as much as like people dislike Watchmen, I still love the beginning of Watchmen. The first 2 minutes are an incredible.
Zack Snyder is great at making trailers. He's not good at making movies.
Yeah, that's kind of my point, and I've still never seen Dawn of the Dead, which I'm not really a fan to see that remake anyway. But I don't think I'll ever watch that remake. But I don't know. He has some good aspects to him. I feel like Snyder just needs help. Like he should be co-directing, or maybe just like working on the cinematography end, and not necessarily helming the director's chair. And I think that's clear at this point. Um, but then again, it's just like the way that they put this script together, it just felt like that's probably just a lot of executives telling them, hey, we need this, this, and this, and this, and we need to set up these next movies, so you need to put all this stuff in this movie. And that's probably, I don't know if it's necessarily his fault, but it's probably not his idea to shoehorn in Wonder Woman and Doomsday and all this other shit. He probably wanted us to have it just, focused on Batman and Superman, but he didn't have that option. So it's hard to say who's to blame on that end. And the story score, I'm gonna go with a five, just because like I feel as bad as it was put together, there's still some good in this. And if you want to like cut it up a little bit and make it its own little movie stuff and clips here and there, I think you can find some good in this.
I mean, ultimately, I don't think the Batman and the Superman stuff works all that well. Maybe the Batman stuff would work on its own. Maybe the Superman stuff would work on its own. But together, I think he just makes two very unlikable characters, and that's the reason that you almost have to introduce Wonder Woman so that the audience has someone that they can root for. As I've said previously, Zack Snyder is very good at creating trailers. If you watch the trailer for the Watchmen movie, it is spectacular. If you watch the trailer for Man of Steel, it is a spectacularly made Superman movie. But then you sit down and actually watch his movies, and you realize just how bad of a storyteller he is. And there is so Zack Snyder's best movie is the one where James Gunn was the screenwriter, and that was the 2004 version of Dawn of the Dead. So that should tell you everything that you need to know. Zack Snyder has basically every movie that he has ever made has been an adaptation except for one movie. The one that was what was it called? Sucker Punch. That is Zack Snyder basically on his own, not really doing something that is adapted, and it's one of the worst movies that I've ever seen. I think there is a problem with Zack Snyder and the way that he adapts things, because I think he has a very specific vision, and sometimes I think it works. But for the most part, from a storytelling perspective, I think his cynicism and the way that his characters behave, it just makes the films very unlikable. The saturated colors certainly don't help his cause. And we're going to transition into the technical category in just a second, but my story score is a 3 because this movie is a complete mess, and I think it suffers greatly from trying to shoehorn all these different things. But on the technical side of things, there are a lot of visually striking images, but they ultimately don't mean anything. I think some of the stuff that they do with Wonder Woman, the scene that parallels the fighting game Injustice, the nightmare sequence, I think there are some interesting images there, but there is the usual problem of Zack Snyder's saturated colors. There's the fact that this movie is 2.5 hours long, and then there's a 3-hour cut that basically makes it a little bit better. But who wants to sit down and watch a Batman versus Superman movie that is this cynical and is this dark? I am willing to sit down for a 3-hour superhero movie, as I do with Avengers Endgame, but in this case, I'm just not willing to do that. And I think the score is very good. It was done by Hans Zimmer. I think the introduction of the Wonder Woman score, I think, is the best element, but I think even with Batman and Superman, I think there's some very good musical cues. So from a technical perspective, I think this is the strongest aspect. Despite some of my issues, I'm still willing to give this a 6.
See, I'm gonna go with an 8 because I think the Batcave was just fantastic. The look of the Batcave, the way it was put together, had a lot of depth to it. Had a lot of cool new technology in it. I thought that looked great. The way that like even Bruce, even Alfred are just wearing these dark gray colors. I thought that was like a nice little touch. But then again, I feel like if you're gonna do like a Batman versus Superman movie, you shoot the Batman stuff dark, but then I would shoot the Superman stuff in like bright lit daytime and make that stark contrast and kind of reflect that visually, even between the two characters visually, like there's a contrast between the two, from like these dark night shots to these bright day shots. But they didn't really do that, and I thought that was a really missed opportunity there because that's kind of the way I picture a Batman versus Superman movie. A lot of the Superman stuff, the Clark Kent stuff, should be bright lit during the day, bright colors, and at night you see Bruce Wayne, but in like the darkly lit, cave, dark corners in the alley, that kind of thing. So I thought there was like a missed opportunity there, but again, the score is fantastic because Hans Zimmer is out of his mind when it comes to these superhero scores. I still love like that Batman theme from the beginning is just so haunting on the piano. It's fantastic. You know what I mean? Like I can't deny how great that music is. So I'll go with an 8. I just again the Superman suit at times kind of looked bright, when he was like at the center because that was during the day, but then the rest of the time he's at night and you can't really see the bright colors, and that's just kind of Zack Snyder's fault because he has this kind of color template and color palette that's kind of dark, and he raises the contrast and he makes things darker and lowers the brightness, and I get that that's his visual style. So it could have been better. The CGI on Doomsday kind of sucked by the end of it. Yeah, I liked how it kept changing and changing, but then it just looked too CGI and crazy by the end that it kind of took away from it. So
When we look at the legacy of this movie, I think the critical backlash was vicious for this movie, as I think people really turned on the DCEU at this point. I think you saw a little bit of it with Man of Steel, but you really saw the volume turned up, and the fact that Civil War came out a couple months later and was so much well regarded as basically a replacement for Avengers Age of Ultron, I think it just hurts the legacy of this tremendously. As I mentioned before, I think that when people think of this movie, they are going to mock it with the Martha stuff. I think that's something that they are never going to be able to outlast. I think to Zack Snyder's credit, I think he made two really positive decisions in relation to the DCEU as he helped participate in the casting of both Gal Gadot and Jason Momoa as Wonder Woman and Aquaman, respectively. And I think those are two casting decisions that have paid off very well for the DCEU when I think even the Justice League has not. And I think that this is a movie that has kind of been forgotten by a lot of people. And again, when they think of it, it's about Martha. And for those reasons, my legacy score is a 4.
I'll go with a 5, and it's just pretty much the reasons you laid out. It's like even though this has a bad legacy with the critics and it didn't perform as well as it probably should. It probably should have peaked at a billion. Spider-Man's going to make a billion. This made like 850 worldwide, so that's really disappointing, even though it's a lot. But it did introduce Aquaman, which ended up being what, $1 billion franchise on its own now. So that's kind of influential. And the fact that they introduced Wonder Woman, which she's getting a big sequel now, and it's going to be probably one of the bigger comic book movies coming out next year. I think I'm more excited for Wonder Woman 2 than I am the Mystery May MCU movie, which I think is going to be Black Widow. But still, like, I'm really hyped for Wonder Woman 2, like, a lot. So there's still that kind of like hope there in the franchise. It's just anything Batman and Superman related, it's pretty dark and bleak because they're doing a whole other, they're doing like two or three separate Batman universes within this not continuity, but within the Warner Brothers franchise. So it's just like there's a lot going on. But in terms of the legacy, yeah, I'll go with a 5 because I mean we're still in this universe, still in this DCEU, and we don't know where it's going. But I mean we still have Aquaman and we still have Wonder Woman, so we're going somewhere.
And we also do have Shazam. Shazam did well. It did not do nearly as well as Wonder Woman or Aquaman, but it certainly did not shit the bed. And I think that's also something that you have to look at, is that you have three individual characters who are doing very well, and perhaps there will come a point when they can do these crossovers and maybe it'll work. But I really like that they are keeping these characters individualized and not necessarily thinking about a long-term universe at this point. I think that's a really good choice. My total score is a 17.
Mine is a 29, so it didn't crack 30, but 29 I think is still pretty high for some people, and they're going to be kind of shocked. But hey, it's just one of those things that, every now and then I'll probably put this on in the background on TNT or something like that and just kind of leave it on. And for me, it's something that I don't hate, and, I find the 90s Batman movies much more offensive, so I don't know what that says.
I don't know, man. It's really close between this and Batman Forever. I think I gave the same score to both this and Batman Forever. If you were to ask me which one I would rather watch, I think I would pick Batman Forever over this. It'd be really, really close. This is definitely better in almost every conceivable way than Batman and Robin, which is inexcusably bad, but there are certainly some of those grown moments in here. So before we go, let's get to the burning questions. Why would anyone idealize Superman and Batman based on this movie? These burning questions, by the way, are going to be very leading.
I don't know, but I know I would still idolize Batman because, I mean, the dude's rich, can do whatever he wants, punches people in the face. Why not?
Brian, are you just branding people when you go to PWG? Do you just brand the wrestlers with your Brian to Brain symbol?
My stamp of approval is not as highly regarded anymore. I think that's more of Tim Dog. That's a shout out to my buddy Tim. I think Super Dragon listens to him more than the fans.
Explain the plot of this movie in 10 words or less.
Lex Luthor tricks Batman and Superman to fight each other. I think that's 11, but
You have not even encompassed any other aspect of this, including the Wonder Woman or Doomsday part.
yeah, that's a lot. It's a lot of things going on in this movie that I wish they would have just broken down into episodes or something to make it more palatable.
I think it's amazing how little we actually talked about the fight between Batman versus Superman. I think that says a lot about this movie. All I could say is 10 words or less. Martha. That's my word. Jimmy Olsen being murdered, Batman branding people, or Martha. What is the most egregious of these sins?
Maybe Batman branding people, I guess, because there wasn't really a payoff to that at all, except for him just punching the wall at the end. I still don't know why he was doing it, but it's kind of fucked up because I read or I saw the deleted scenes were like the reason. I guess like if you're in prison and they find the brand on you from the bat, they're gonna kill you, which is kind of fucked up, and there's no reason why. But that's very fucked up.
Yes, Batman branding people is horrible, both because it's violent and because people get killed because of it. That is definitely the most egregious. Which actor is wasted most? For me, it's Amy Adams. They give her nothing to do almost. She appears kind of at the beginning and the end, and she is very uninvolved in the action, so my choice very easily is Amy Adams. And this is not the only time I'm going to answer this question from a DCEU movie with this answer.
Very funny. Holly Hunter. That character was not necessary at all, but they just kind of added that character. I don't know why to make it more serious of a movie, more dramatic, I guess, or something. But there was no reason for her to be in that movie at all. And she's such a great actress, and she does a hell of a lot more or a better job in Incredibles 2 just by voice acting than being in this movie. So that kind of sucks. But she did have her like a few little moments here and there, but all for naught because it was not really necessary.
A female Democratic senator from Kentucky. What universe is Zack Snyder living in?
His own.
Does Zack Snyder? So this is the actual burning question. That was a rhetorical question. Does Zack Snyder hate Batman? Yes, of course he does.
Batman or Superman? I'm not sure. I don't think he hates Batman because he seems to like really dig deep into his whole love and obsession of Batman, especially in the first 2 minutes. Does he hate Superman? I don't think he hates Superman. I just think he treats him like an alien and does this modern approach, politicizing him a little bit, maybe too much. And that's probably what you shouldn't do with Superman. You know, is he American? Does he represent the world? Who does he represent? It's just too many like ethical questions that you really don't need to think about with Superman. And I think that's his problem, and that's probably another wasted 5-10 minutes of these media outlets trying to debate whether or not he's a god or is he here to save us or blah blah blah. And they didn't really need to do that.
Absolutely. All right. So next week it's not going to get any better because we are going to be reviewing Suicide Squad, a movie that is infamous for a lot of different reasons. Most of which is because Jared Leto as the Joker literally has the word damaged written on his forehead. That summarizes my thoughts on this movie.
You mean not the fact that there was two cuts that got merged into one cut because the trailer looks so good and that they wanted to make it more hip?
Ugh, I am not looking forward to talking about this movie, but that's what we're going to do next week because we promised to do all the Batman movies, and it is tangentially related to Batman. We even get a Ben Affleck cameo. I think the most interesting aspect is that Will Smith cameoed in a Ben Affleck movie, which was Jersey Girl, and now we have Ben Affleck cameoing in a Will Smith movie that is Suicide Squad, and I cannot decide which is worse.
Also, the fact that we had a Batman versus Superman logo hidden in a 2007 Will Smith movie.
There's also that. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back next week to talk about the Suicide Squad.
You know, I know no one named Martha, so what does that tell you?